What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Early Read, the Thursday episode. We're doing it backwards this week. We're going to do a guest later in the week. We got at Mr. _ Peanut Better. That's kind of a mouthful to say, but we got Peanut on the show today to go through some of the biggest games on what is let's call it an interesting week 3 slate, the last gasp of non-conference play. And we're going to collaborate at the end of the show, try and make an underdog round robin. Really excited for this episode. Peanut, what's up, man? Welcome to the show. How's it going?
How's it going? Maybe lying a little bit when you said interesting week 3. I would say it's probably one of the least interesting weeks of the season so far.
I had to welcome you in though with like something exciting. I had to, I couldn't people are going to sign off now. They're like, oh, this guy, he's talking about some crap slate.
No, I mean, that's a great thing about college football. There's so many games that even the bad weeks are still, pretty good relative to what I think other sports where you get to see there's always something that should be interesting on the slate.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we talk about this week in general, we're going to talk about this episode's going to come out Thursday morning. So we're going to talk about the game tonight, Arizona State, Texas State, which is important to at least myself. And we're going to talk Kansas State, Arizona on Friday night. But overall, any takeaways from the beginning of the season that you think have been either surprising, something maybe that you had a hunch on that has come to fruition? Anything stand out to you through 2 weeks of play?
I would say, I thought at the beginning of the year that the teams maybe in the 5 to 15 range were going to catch up with the top of the sport. Georgia didn't look as unbeatable in future years. Ohio State had some questions at quarterback, and, Texas was replacing a lot. And what we've seen so far is kind of the opposite, where those top teams, those 3 in specific, they look really good. And some of those other teams in the 10 to 20 range haven't looked as good as I thought they would at the beginning of the year. Obviously, Notre Dame, LSU, schools like that, I thought would actually be able to compete with the top of the league. But it looks more kind of like in years past where the top 3 or 4 schools seem to kind of be a cut above everybody else.
And I actually think that's a good segue into this week because you got a few of the top teams with some bye weeks, a few teams last gasp of non-conference. There's a few conference games. There are even a few not conference teams playing each other that are non-conference games. But I think it's interesting you're noting maybe the gap is still wider than it used to be between these top teams. And I saw a number somewhere where underdogs, and this doesn't mean anything necessarily, but underdogs are cashing, I think, at like a 60-something% clip, just blindly through the beginning of the season. I wonder with conference play in full starting next week and beyond, do you see some teams maybe still working through the kinks, still trying to figure things out, especially with the transfer portal being as prominent as it is now? Some teams might need a few weeks to get into the swing of things. Anything on the transfer portal and how it's maybe affecting the early season results?
Yeah, I thought at the beginning of the year, another area where I was kind of wrong was I thought you would start to see these major conferences. If you looked at it, the major conferences have started to kind of separate from the group of 5 schools
Mm-hmm.
as far as, one school, even your bad Purdue's, for example, can pay NIL deal much more significantly than Bowling Green or Toledo. So I thought that you would start to see more separation of those schools. I don't know if we've necessarily seen it to that level that I thought you would. But it also could be another situation where you mentioned underdogs cashing at a higher rate, that these schools don't feel the need to put on a show early in the season with the 12-team playoff. With 4 teams, if you have one loss, you got to look good in the rest of your
Yeah.
games, got to look dominant to get in with that one loss. With 12 schools and, of course, the conference champions getting in, maybe you're more likely to play things a little closer to the vest. Okay, escape, get out of there with a win. You don't have to look quite as dominant in order to be a playoff team anymore.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting backdrop of the whole season. This is the first season, I think, in this era. Whatever this era is going to be and however long it's going to go, I'm not necessarily sure, but this extended playoff, I think, has really changed that. And maybe it's all noise and maybe it doesn't matter. I know we had been chatting about the head comms and how that's affecting games offline. But I just think there's a lot of noise right now and sifting it out. Maybe it is something, maybe it's nothing. I just think it's very interesting how this season has already started with the backdrop of this extended playoff. Because while it seems like these games don't matter, there also are like the consequences down the road. If like you keep playing out the string, like, okay, well, you didn't look good here. That might come back to haunt you later on. Maybe you do drop a game a little earlier. I just think it's interesting that we don't really know where this season's going, even though we're trying to predict it in the short term.
Right. And, it's easy to react to every single data point when you don't have much going beyond it. Does this mean this? Is this an example of quarterbacks not being with their teams in the transfer portal? Or maybe it's a bunch of 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds lost a game randomly to Northern Illinois. It could mean absolutely nothing. And we're trying to sometimes draw these overarching conclusions about the future of the sport based on bunch of kids essentially and how they're acting. So you don't want to overreact to too much, but it is interesting. You're right. It is kind of, this is for better or worse, kind of with the NIL, transfer portal, extended playoffs. It seems like this is what we're going to have at least for a little bit, with some tweaks around there. And obviously the larger conferences too impacts things.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some games this week then. We start Thursday night, Arizona State, Texas State. Peanut, I have been talking up Texas State this entire offseason. This has been my team. This is my G5. I think there's a few handful in the community, in the gambling, sports betting, Twitter community that were touting this team, really high on this team going into the year. First test, they ace it. They beat the crap out of UTSA. Next test on Thursday against Arizona State, who has also looked far, far improved. I think this was a team, I want to say they lost 51 games from their week one starting offensive line group. And you're seeing what a healthy offensive line group can do when they just absolutely bully Wyoming and to a much better extent, Mississippi State last week. They now go to San Marcos, the Sun Devils, as a now 1-point favorite. I broke this game down on the early week episode. I bet Texas State. So, Peanut, what are your thoughts on this game going into Thursday? Are we the same side or are we going Oppo here?
I have the spread as 2 in my number, so I basically think that it's right on line.
Okay.
Not something I'm playing, and it's also something I think with a lot of uncertainty in the game. I have no idea if Arizona State's actually good or if they've beaten up on two really bad teams. It wouldn't surprise me if they're either of those so far. Texas State, I do kind of feel I know what I'm getting out of them. I think they're a really good G5 team. Jordan McLeod is a really good player. I think that they kind of wanted to get rid of uh, the prior quarterback's escaping my name right now.
TJ Finley.
Yeah, Finley. The reports are they didn't necessarily kind of miss him leaving, and the fact he went to Western Kentucky. I don't think that they were too torn up about that. So I think they got a big upgrade at quarterback. They have some transfers coming in on both sides of the ball that are helpful. I know what I'm getting out of them. Arizona State, though, there's a chance that they're just a quality Power 5 team, and obviously a quality Power 5 team beats a good G5 team almost all the time. So to me, this game says a lot more about what is Arizona State. I think that there's a chance that they're good, and there's a chance that they beat up on a bunch of pumpkins, and we'll start to see that come on Thursday night.
So without rehashing my entire handicap in the game, if you want that, go back and listen to the Tuesday episode. But I'll go back and forth here because what I think is interesting about this game is the strength of the Texas State defense is on the defensive line. That's where they want to stop the run. That's where they're super aggressive. They have former Power 5 guys on the defense line. They have size there. So to me, it's can they force Arizona State to throw? And I know Sam Leavitt looked good against Wyoming. Didn't look as good. It also wasn't as necessary against Miss State. This is an aggressive Texas State defense. They ranked second in tackles for loss last season. They're hyper aggressive, but it also leaves them prone to big plays over the top. To me, it's can Arizona State win through the air more so than with like Scatabo and Brown is coming off the injury report. He looks like he's going to play on a short week after riding Scatabo for like 30 plus carries. I think it's got a kind of tricky situation for Arizona State. So while I admit Arizona State may be a much better team than people thought going into the season, I'm siding with the slight home dog here because I think this setup for them is pretty good. And also Mississippi State was able to, I thought they got beat early and maybe the scoreboard looked a little whack, but Mississippi State was able to move the ball at different points in that game, especially early on. They had a drive stall in the red zone that led to a field goal. Game got away from them kind of quickly. I think Texas State's going to be able to scheme some shots up here. Again, short week at home. So I like Texas State, but I do agree with you. I think this is going to say a lot about Arizona State and what kind of quality they are.
Right. Yeah. I would lean Texas State as well. Arizona State so far has been able to just stay in standard downs, been able to play that kind of bully ball style that they've wanted to play. I don't know if they'll be able to do that against Arizona or against Texas State. Texas State does a lot of things similarly offensively to what they're doing in Mississippi State with Levy coming over.
Yeah.
Runs that kind of. I think he's from the I don't know if we're allowed to call it the Bryles tree anymore, but essentially from that offense, kind of that system, there's a lot of what Kenny's doing at Texas State baked into that. So, I think that there's a chance Arizona State just is
Yeah.
kind of a step above in terms of athletes and everything like that. But Texas State is by far the more trustworthy team at this point and the more consistent team.
So just a little bit further out, Texas State wins. Are you like in on them being a G5 auto bid? Like you're buying them as that potential, that not that they have to, but you think like, yeah, you have to put them in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It depends. Also, there's an important game going on in those terms with Memphis and Florida State.
We're going to talk about that.
To me, the Memphis is the best G5 team that we have. But certainly, if Texas State wins this game, specifically wins it convincingly, again, we don't know what Arizona State
Yeah.
is. So we'll see how impressive the win is later in the year. If Arizona State turns out to actually not be that good, then it will obviously mean less.
Mhm.
But, I think that they're at least in the conversation. Sure, if they win the Sun Belt, it will come down to ultimately probably the winner of the Sun Belt, and whether it's Memphis or maybe Liberty. We'll see there.
Yeah. We move on to Friday night. Kansas State hosts Arizona. This is a non-conference game between Big 12 teams because they scheduled this game before all the conference realignment. Super interesting setup here. Kansas State laying a touchdown. Totals taking a ride. I gave that out on the show on Tuesday morning. So we got some good numbers there if you follow down the show. But totals taking a ride. I obviously agree with it. Peanut, what are your thoughts on this one? Total sitting at now, I see 59.5. So we're way up here. You agree with that move? What are your thoughts on this game?
What I think is kind of interesting is Kansas State has really not run Avery Johnson so far this year. I thought that they were going to beat. I thought they were a better team than Tulane going in. I thought that win was going to be more convincing than it was. Tulane was pretty well able to match up with them along the lines of scrimmage, I thought. And if you're going to make Avery Johnson a passer, I just don't know if he's that threatening of a player. Maybe if you're rolling him out, letting him do some other stuff. But if you're making him a drop back passer, I don't think that he's super effective. With that being said, Arizona's been pretty soft to this point as far as defensively. They allowed New Mexico State to kind of move the ball up and down on them. It will be interesting. Arizona is obviously able to put up points very quickly. I don't know. They're kind of like, they're kind of a version of Colorado. They're pretty similar as far as their kind of style and everything like that. Not obviously not the attention, a little bit better than Colorado, but they're similar in that fashion that they don't dominate the lines of scrimmage. Kansas State is almost the opposite of them in that regard. So we'll see. I think it's interesting that Avery Johnson again hasn't ran the ball at all, and see if they'll start to kind of uncork that against Arizona, or if they'll continue with the offense they've been running.
I agree. I think both offenses have like a clear avenue to points with the way Mensa's good, the Tulane quarterback, Darian Mensa. This kid has a live arm. He seems prime for a P5 transfer after this season. But besides that, with Fafita and McMillan, I think they're going to be able to find answers against this Kansas State secondary. But then on the other side, Arizona's rush defense seems to be in worse shape than its secondary. So I think this is the game where you maybe let Avery Johnson cook a little bit with his legs, because I've been on multiple tangents about how I don't think he's a very good passer. But between Giddens, Johnson, and the Colorado transfer Dylan Edwards, I think they're going to be able to find answers there. So this game looks like a back and forth, not necessarily up tempo, but like high efficiency affair, where I think both offenses have a pretty clear avenue to point. So I like over here. I think both teams have concerns when we're talking like big picture, Big 12. I think I was down on both these teams going into the year, and I haven't loved what I've seen so far. So I guess this is just another great data point for both teams, but I think both defenses are going to be up against it because I feel like I could trust both offenses a little bit more. Any opinion on the total? Obviously, it's a bit higher now than open.
Yeah, I agree with you on offensively what's going on there. I have the total as like 58, so I have it right in line with market at this point in time. It's just a little bit below actually, but that's something before I'm regressing to market, so it's not something I would play at that
Yeah.
total level. I think that the paces of both teams being a little bit slower is the only thing that's going to slow it down. But in terms of efficiency, you're 100% right. Yeah, I just don't think either of them is going to be particularly effective stopping one another. I would certainly give Kansas State a better chance. I
Mhm.
think what they do defensively, it wouldn't shock me if Kansas State's defense came out and had a good performance against Arizona. It would shock me pretty heavily if Arizona was able to slow down Kansas State consistently.
Should be a good watch either way. Like two entertaining teams going at it. So it should be a good watch on Friday night. We move to Saturday. I got a handful of games written down that I like to talk about, and we'll start. Uh, I don't know where to go with this game. I have a lean written down. I haven't bet anything in this one, but Florida and Texas A&M is a super interesting matchup because there's a ton of questions. We don't know who Billy Napier is going to start at quarterback for the Gators, whether it's going to be DJ Lagway or Graham Mertz. He said both are going to play. We'll see how that goes for him. I think Lagway gives him the higher ceiling, Mertz the higher floor. Texas A&M, they beat up on, I think it was McNeese or somebody crappy in the FCS ranks last week. Last time we saw them, they were struggling to move the ball at all against Notre Dame. So my question is, does it matter who Florida plays at quarterback? And does A&M go in there with what I still rate as an elite defense, and the offense comes together enough that they go on the road and win? Maybe not similar to how Miami won, but they take care of business against a bad defense that Miami wasn't, that Miami was like able to. Because this is a similar point spread, a little bit more in favor of the Aggies. Is that justified?
So Texas A&M, I was super high on them coming into the year. Um, I think that in that game against Notre Dame, it was played much more even than people kind of have already started to think of it as like this big dominating Notre Dame win. They certainly lost, they deserved to lose that game. I'm not saying that the wrong side won or anything like that, but it wasn't a total kind of domination. The Texas A&M defense looked really good to me against Notre Dame in that. I think that offensively they lost two linemen early in the game. That really impacts you, especially when you're not able to scheme around it. Now that they at least have some time to deal with those injuries, you're able to keep a tight end in, block a little bit more. And they were dealing with a Notre Dame defense that, even though we saw their struggles against Northern Illinois, the Notre Dame defense is still for real. That wasn't the reason they lost in that game. And that secondary is, one, really well coached, and two, has some athletes on there. So I think that Texas A&M, there's a chance that they kind of right the ship this year. We look back and are like, oh yeah, it's kind of weird they lost that game. They're still learning to gel. I'm not convinced they will. I'm not saying that's I'm super confident in Texas A&M, but I think there's some chance of it. For Florida, I just don't see that happening. Quarterback, I think that the plan is probably actually to play Lagley.
Yeah.
And then for Mert, if Lagway is really struggling, and this Florida offensive line, which we were told was going to be improved all off season, isn't better and Lagway struggling, then you can go to Mertz without it looking like you benched Lagway. So you can have a way, kind of an out for him without killing the kid's confidence, and it doesn't look like you benched the young kid right away. So you say, hey, I'm going to play them both. But really, it probably is Lagway's job to lose. If he's playing well, I just don't see them going back to Mertz. It doesn't make a lot of sense in my mind. But if he's struggling really bad, this is a way to go back to Mertz without necessarily acting like you benched the young kid. So I think the Texas A&M is kind of the side I like in this one a little bit more than Florida at the current number. With that being said, you're playing in the swamp in a SEC game. Florida, they still have some guys, so
Yeah.
I understand the reasoning behind Florida. I see it. I kind of like it more subjectively than my numbers like it, but I kind of lean Texas A&M in this one. And if you told me one side was going to win convincingly, I would be much more confident that it was Texas A&M than Florida. Where if I feel even if they win, it feels like they're going to kind of escape with this one.
Yeah, so I just checked my phone. Eugene Wilson, questionable for the game with a lower body injury, was just announced. The Gators just dropped their first injury report. We're recording this on Wednesday night. So obviously, top wide receiver. We'll see how that goes. I agree with you. It does feel like, because I was high on A&M going into the year as well. Wegman looked absolutely terrible. That was a really, like, he was fading, looked like he was afraid is a strong word, but you know what I mean? He seemed like he just wasn't comfortable whatsoever in that game against Notre Dame. This Florida defense is much weaker, but also faces, you're on the road now as opposed to in College Station. I agree. I'd lean with A&M. I don't know if I could trust them, though, to go on the road and win, like enough to lay the points. I'd rather instead, if I sit this one out and I miss it, it is what it is. But to me, it'd be A&M or pass. Just with the questions about Lagway and who's going to play a quarterback, I think that opens up a lot of volatility in this game that I'm not sure I want to get involved with. And if it's Mertz, Florida team total under maybe, that's where like they just can't move the ball at all against this A&M defense. And even if A&M can't score, you don't have to worry, I guess, with laying the points there. You just are worried. You're focused on A&M's defense handling Florida's offense.
Yeah. I mean, I think if Mertz is there, the team total is low enough. It would be you'd be able to grind out some possessions and points like that. I'm with you on generally. I'm just probably going to watch this one. I won't have a side on it either way. I would again say Texas A&M or nothing. Wegman in regards to that first game, there have been quarterbacks. I think we sometimes are too quick to say one bad performance and this guy's actually not it, which has happened. You can tell early, but sometimes these guys, they have one bad game and we kind of write them off a little bit too quick. Connor Wegman did have a good year last year before he was injured. There wasn't a ton of questions about him being an SEC quality quarterback coming into the season. It was more of a health thing.
Yeah.
So I do think a guy who was sick, the flu's real. That has, he was throwing up on the sidelines. There's been clips of that. So maybe there's a chance we look back and think, okay, this Al Golden defense, well coached, kind of surprised him with some things. Two offensive linemen out. I just think that there's a chance we look back on this game and think, oh, Texas A&M, they were the quality team all along. Where I just don't see myself looking back and being like, wow, I really underrated Florida at that point.
No, that's a good look. It's a good point. Something maybe to consider as the week goes on. I'm not sure as much to say about this game, but it is interesting because Riley Leonard has a shoulder injury. We don't know we don't know his availability. I saw during the game he took a shot. I don't think he got sacked. I think he got wrapped up. He threw the ball out of bounds, but he landed directly on his non-throwing shoulder. We'll see injury status for this one. They do have a capable backup in Steve Angeli. They go to West Lafayette to play Purdue. Obviously, they're on the heels of losing what is probably the biggest upset of the entire season, losing as 4-touchdown favorites to Northern Illinois. I'll be short on this one. I don't have a bet on this game. It's obviously the Leonard injury, but I can see Notre Dame getting off the mat for this one because I like the matchup against Purdue. If it was like a fully healthy Riley Leonard, I think I'd be in on this one. Purdue last season, and I know Hudson Card like absolutely cooked whatever FCS team he played in week 1, and they had a bye in week 2. Purdue played 8 teams inside the top 50 in yards per play last season. So we could call it 8 quality defenses last season in the Big Ten. They averaged 17 a game, and they scored more than 20 twice. And it was against Illinois, who, by looking at it, I'm not going to list them all, probably the worst defense of that 8. So it's an offense that really struggled against elite defenses. I think you definitely see a really good effort from Notre Dame's defense. It's, to me, can the offense really show up here? So that's just a note there on Notre Dame Purdue. Do you have any thoughts here, Peanut? Because I know it's a game that's going to get a lot of eyeballs because of what happened last week.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Riley Leonard is banged up, if he's actually good. What makes him so exciting is that he's this big athlete back there, former basketball player that's able to extend and make plays. If he's injured and he's sitting back and throwing darts in a clean pocket, I just don't think he's that special. In fact, I think him at that level is not as special as Hudson Card at the other end, who I think is a really quality quarterback. Played at Texas, so he has a pedigree behind him. He's been really good. I think he was good last year for Purdue.
Yes,
To
their
kind of back
offense
up your
their
points.
offense is better than it gets credit for. Even though I
I
talk
agree with
bad
that.
about it, but like against bad teams, they could cook. This is obviously a different ask.
Yeah, yeah. The question kind of maybe is then, how good is this Notre Dame defense? Everybody's kind of focusing on the offensive side of the ball, which I understand, especially with Leonard, and that's the side more in question. But the difference might be, is this Notre Dame defense top 15 defense? If so, then Purdue's going to have some success and at least get some scores. If this Notre Dame is actually an elite defense, one of the top 5 defenses in the kind of, just behind the elite of elite tier, if they're that level of good, maybe they're just suffocating and Purdue's not able to do anything on that end. So everybody's kind of focusing on the offensive side of the ball. I think that there is some chance that maybe this game comes down to the other side, and is Notre Dame able to totally erase Purdue on that end? Because that might be what's necessary.
Yeah, we'll see. It should be an interesting to see how this Purdue or how this Notre Dame team reacts to just a possibly disqualifying loss for the college football playoff. So we'll see how this goes. A game that we were talking about a little bit before, alluded to it. Memphis travels to Tallahassee to take on Florida State, team that has been plummeting probably faster than any team in the country. The Noles, they get a bye after 2 losses to start the season. In comes Memphis. Didn't talk about this game earlier in the week, so Pino, I'll give you first word here. What are your thoughts on Memphis and what it could be the first serious stake your claim where the G5 auto bid?
Yeah, I am a little bit less down on Florida State than some people after the first 2 games. I know that's really, it's not a popular opinion to say right now currently with the way DJ's been playing, and the way they've gotten just kind of moved on the defensive side of the ball. But I thought they played those games pretty close to even with both those guys. And yeah, you don't want to be playing necessarily even with BC and Georgia Tech, and maybe that says enough about them. But I do think that Florida State, those were 2 really low drive games. Came down to a couple big plays. I still believe in Florida State on as far as just an overall roster talent standpoint. But with that being said, they're facing a team that I was just really high on coming into the season in Memphis. I think Memphis can score with anybody on the offensive side of the ball. I think Seth Hennigan's really good. I think they're good on the outside at both wide receiver positions. So these are 2 teams that I'm probably higher on compared to the rest of the market. With that being said, coming off a bye really is helpful to Florida State for me. And I just think they have a different quality level of athlete. I lean Florida State in this game. But and it's also for Florida State. It's not a usual situation where you come in and it's a G5 opponent. This is going to mean a lot more for Memphis than it does for Florida State. You wonder if Florida State's looking forward to the ACC schedule. I would certainly hope they're past that point here.
No more look
With
ahead.
what
You've lost look ahead privileges.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the look ahead tag has been lost for Florida State. So I kind of like Florida State here home. It's been a tough couple weeks, but I don't think it's been as bad as far as predictive performance for Florida State as the narrative and the what's happened to them in the win-loss column. So I think Florida State here is in a good spot, but I do like Memphis, and I do think that they have pretty close to Power 5 talent when it comes to skill positions. It's just defensively, they're still a little bit behind. Troy's quarterback was injured in that game. They didn't look particularly great. Now, maybe that was a look-ahead performance, but I still think that Florida State here has a higher quality athlete. Long lines of scrimmage are going to be better, and that's where I kind of lean in this point at this point.
Troy was able to move the ball in that game, even with their backup quarterback. They put up a 45% success rate, that's 68th percentile relative to games last season, and a 10% explosive play rate. So Memphis won by 21, but I wouldn't say like they put the screws to Troy with a backup quarterback in, no less. So, and this is a bad Troy team. So I also I'm not going to bet on it because I think that there's like some serious downside, like risk to Florida State. Like they could just be done. If you want some narrative street, you got Mike Norvell playing his old team against his successor, Ryan Silverfield. So we'll see. But this was a Memphis defense that I thought was absolute hot garbage last year. By my eye test, they were the second worst tackling team in the country besides USC. I think they graded out by PFF like bottom 10. So I'm not really that high on this Memphis defense. I know they got some transfers, but maybe they haven't improved all that much. So I agree that I think this is setting up for Florida State to get off the mat. My concern, I don't know if their defense is very good, Florida State. They seem to really be missing some of the guys that they lost to the pros. Maybe it's like a sneaky over game, but granted, maybe I have blinders up because I kind of like I didn't bet it, but I like the over in the BC Florida State game, and I bet the over in the Georgia Tech Florida State game. So maybe I'm just giving FSU's offense too much credit, but I do think that Memphis's defense, there's some concern here, and I wonder if FSU with a good game plan can come out and execute.
Yeah, I think that you're right on that. I thought that the transfers would be more of an impact for Memphis. And after a game, I don't want to say, hey, well, they
Yeah.
weren't good in this one single game, and uh, maybe we should just give up on all the transfers that came in. But you're right. EPA per play, Troy was in the 50th percentile. Success rate, 68th percentile. EPA per dropback was in the 70th percentile. Memphis certainly didn't look good on that side of the ball against a Troy team that nobody was scared of. So even if DJ isn't good, I would guess that he's better than Matthew Caldwell of Troy. So
Yeah.
I was pretty down on Troy this season. I thought Memphis was going to win that game by more. The line actually got away from me, luckily, before I was able to bet it for Memphis Troy. So I saved myself on that one by missing it on the screen. But yeah, I think that this is kind of I'm kind of higher on both these teams, Florida State and Memphis. But if Memphis isn't able to look good in this game defensively against a struggling DJU, I think that maybe these transfer talks have been a little bit overrated.
Yeah. Let's move on. I got a few more games, then we'll do some underdog round robin. The Apple Cup, the non-conference edition. Washington and Wazoo meet at the Seahawks Stadium, Lumen Field. Two teams, I think, with still a lot of questions. Washington State did just beat the crap out of Texas Tech. Box score, I think, a little bit different than what happened on the field. I think it tells a bit of a different story. Washington, meanwhile, they've taken care of business. Their first two wins against Weber State and Eastern Michigan. So the new look Huskies get off to a good start. Washington State, they got to turn over a lot of stuff. Their starting quarterback, John Mateer, he ran for, I want to say it was $150 in the win against Texas Tech, and only passed for like 100 something yards. So let me pull this up here. We had Mateer. Where'd he go? Oh, he ran for 197 against Texas Tech, and they forced a handful of touchdowns. I think it was 5 touchdowns. So Washington State wins pretty easy there against a banged-up Texas Tech team. Pino, do you have a beat on either of these teams going into the Apple Cup in what is kind of feels like a fork in the road for both teams?
I wish I did have more of a stance on either one of these teams. I technically make the game too, but you could have easily told me before. Usually you have a good sense of what you'll make the game even before you run it. You could have told me that I made this game a pick 'em, or I could have made this game 7, and it wouldn't have surprised me. I have a pretty high level of variance on both these teams. Washington, you know, they looked good against Eastern Michigan, but I think that they didn't look as dominant as people think in that game. I think the score probably, at least offensively, they weren't as crisp as I thought that you'd see from them. I don't know. I have maybe Washington's better than I think, but with such little level of returning talent, I expected them kind of to take a step back this season. I don't know if anything I've seen so far has taken me off that. They lost. I believe they returned just 3 players off their top 24 from last season. So this is basically a whole new team from the team that played in the national title game a year ago. So you basically have none of the same players, especially on offense. New quarterback, new running backs, new wide receivers. I think that they only returned 1 offensive lineman of the starting 5. So I have really no feel for either of these teams. But I mean, I guess we'll see. I think Jed Fish is a pretty good coach. We'll see what he's able to kind of instill in Washington in the first year. But I think people with a lot of certainty of this game, I maybe they have a better read on things than me, but I have no idea.
I think Washington State. All right, so Washington does have some questions. I think Washington State, they might be much worse though. I don't know if I could get there with this game. I know it's on a neutral field. I'm sure both fan bases are going to show up, but I have a bad feeling about Washington State this entire season. That Texas Tech game is not indicative of where this team is at. They were outgained in the game 506 to 412, and they won by 21. A lot of that had to do with some turnover variance going in their favor. Mateer basically just ran the ball the entire time. He's basically running quarterback power the entire game. And I look back to last year. I know it's a new team. Washington State also is replacing, I believe they're outside the top 100 returning production. But last year, Jed Fish's Arizona team beat Washington State in Pullman 44-6. I know it's a different team. You got even a different defensive coordinator. You got Bill Belichick's son, Steve, coaching the defense up on Washington. But I just feel like Washington might. I think the question around Washington are limiting where this line is, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like the caution with Washington is why this line isn't a little bit more ballooned out, given what looks like Will Rogers is a veteran. It seems like he at least has a beat on this offense. And then the defense, I think, can show up here with Steve Belichick coaching it up. And with the way the Arizona game went last year, the number's a little bit wide for me right now. But this, like, I'm not like hunting to bet Washington State in this game. I just think there's way more questions about them than I think people want to admit, given the question around Washington, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that Washington might not be good. Washington State might actually be like actively bad. So
That's what I'm, like. I think people are like, well, we don't know about Washington, so we can't trust them just yet. It's like, well, what if Washington State is like much worse than we like? If you got to move the goalpost over for them too.
yeah, exactly. That's a good point there. Looking into the numbers more, you're right about the running quarterback power thing. He had 100 total yards passing in that game for Washington State. So I certainly knew that Washington State's 37 points was misleading. I guess maybe I didn't know to this extent. Something that maybe I need to look into a little bit deeper, as far as I wasn't sure about the passing game being this ineffective. So you're right on that regard. That might be a game. I'm not usually one of those, wait till what you're seeing live. But I
Yeah.
think these live models, so what they're based off of is the closing number. And then obviously they take into account current score and situation like that. With a game with this much uncertainty as Washington State, that closing number is going to be less efficient than it normally is. So usually the closing number is treated, it gives teams a score probability, success rate probability based on what that closing number is. If that closing number is not accurate like it normally is, there's a chance that there might be some live opportunities there if you're able to get a good read on it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Uh, I try to stay away from live betting. That's just one of the things that drives me insane. But it's definitely a good point. If you see something off with the game, jumping in and making your opinion, then after you see like a few drives or something. The last game of what I'll call the quality games before I throw some trash at you, TCU UCF, another game where it feels like I want to learn more about these teams. I think I'm more confident in what TCU's about. Two teams I'm really interested about. Again, this game should be an absolute banger. Night game in Fort Worth. Peanut, what are your thoughts on TCU UCF?
Yeah, so I like both these teams. This is like two of my children playing one another. UCF, I think, has been I liked a lot of what they brought in on the transfer portal. Defensively, I think that offense is really good. KJ Jefferson, I know he might not be a pro prospect necessarily. I know he has some flaws kind of in the intermediate passing games, things like that, but he's just a really good college player. He's huge. He's physical. He's kind of a gamer. He's able to pass good enough. I don't think he's certainly a bad passer by any means, and I think he fits perfectly what UCF's trying to do. They really haven't had to throw the ball so far this season. TCU, on the other end, I think that they're really dynamic offensively, and they Cooper, the freshman quarterback, has been. I think he's been kind of a big impact on them offensively and what he was able to do both at the end of last year and so far this season. So I think both these teams are obviously very talented offensively. And I think defensively, they're a little bit better than you would have expected from last season. So UCF brings in all those kids on that side of the ball, and TCU brings a lot back and has a defense this year that, quite frankly, makes a little bit more sense than what they were trying to do last year. So I like both these teams relative to market. I'm really excited to see what they'll do here. I probably like UCF a little bit more. I'm higher than market consensus on them. However, TCU at home, I think that they're still dynamic offensively. This to me is probably the best game kind of the day.
I agree.
So I'm really excited to watch it.
Yeah, this is a banger game, whether you're betting or not. Because I don't have a strong opinion. I make UCF a small favorite. Now we're getting a little out there, 2.5. If it hits 3, probably gonna have to go on TCU. Even though I agree, I'm higher than most on UCF. I like this team quite a bit. Total 62.5. That looks pretty good now. I would have bet the over. It's taking money, so I'm good there. My question is, and you kind of alluded to it, if TCU can set the mark in the trenches and really dominate the trenches, where they lose their starting defensive tackle to Oklahoma, Williams, and they have some injuries on the defensive line. If UCF's able to run the ball up and down the field, UCF's probably going to be good. To me, it's, can KJ drop back and throw it close to 30 times a game or something, where this becomes a more pass-happy script? That's where I think TCU can be more efficient on offense and pull away. UCF, they want to set up the run. They want to run the ball more than anything. They want to run to set up the pass. Where TCU, they're comfortable chucking it with Hoover quite a bit. That offense looks real sharp. So to me, I think if UCF gets the push early, that like pushing the line, that's where they're going to take over. If not, I think TCU is more than capable of winning this football game.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is pretty big for the Big 12. You mentioned Kansas State, Arizona haven't, particularly impressed you. I think that that's true. Obviously, Utah has their own set of questions with Rising's injury and that hand, and would be great if we could figure out how serious it actually was instead of having a coach, that is going to certainly obscure
Well,
everything and make it impossible to know. So
Market's
I think
telling
that
you
this
he's
is
out.
potentially.
Market's
Uh,
telling you that hand is going to at least cost him this week against Utah State. So here we go again on the Cam Rising circus.
Yeah. I would be pretty shocked if he plays at this point. They said Wilson's taking first team snaps, and the line is certainly placed at a point where I think that this line would be closer to 4 touchdowns if he was able to play in that game. So yeah, I think that he's certainly going to be missing that one at least. I believe they have a bye after Utah State. So he'll have time to get right. It's a finger, it's not a knee or a shoulder or anything like that. So maybe not, but I think that this game could be certainly have some impact of who's playing in the Big 12 title game, the Central Florida TCU game.
So 2 garbage games I want to throw at you before we do a little underdog round robin talk. Sam Houston is taking on Hawaii on Saturday at 7:00 in the whatever you call the Sam Houston Stadium. I kind of like the over now that's been bet down. I see some 49s, 49.5, 50. It's kind of all over the place, but Sam Houston State, they got 34 against Rice. They packed it in early. They could have scored much more than that. Hit a few explosives, and I know they got crushed by UCF, and they went to both quarterbacks, but in both games now, over, or I'd say above average yards per drop back from this offense, and it's mainly Hunter Watson, the JUCO transfer, facing Hawaii off a bye. I know their defense kind of shut down UCLA, but I don't really rate UCLA's offense very high. Both teams played at above average tempo. If Sam Houston's pushing down the field, and we know Hawaii's offense is capable of putting up points with Brady Traeger quarterback, am I wrong to think over here? I know it's been bet down, so maybe I'm on the wrong side of the market, but this is one I've been mulling over all week, and I might get there. We're now at like a slightly below average scoring projection, where I think both these teams are over teams this season.
So I'm actually part of the money that's moved that game down. So
There we go. Okay. I'm glad we can talk it out.
I would have to say that no, I kind of like the under a little bit more in that game. To me, I don't think that this Hawaii offense is particularly good.
Okay.
They haven't been good to this point in the season. I know that first game against Delaware State was windy, but they kind of got owned on the line of scrimmage. They were owned on the line of scrimmage in the UCLA game. Their main receivers missed the first 2 games this season. It's unclear. He's got some kind of off the field issues, it seems. I'm not
Yeah.
totally sure what's going on there. Pace wise, both teams are pretty close to average tempo. At least I have them so far. Where I think, and I like the Sam Houston State defense, and I like the Hawaii defense. They kind of return a lot of guys. They have a new defensive coordinator. I think that they have been a little bit feistier on that side of the ball than people expected. But where I could be wrong in this game is I think that Sam Houston State new quarterback Watson,
Yeah.
he's kind of electric, and maybe I'm not properly increasing them to this point in the season offensively because they've only had really one game that's been competitive. Obviously, UCF. For a team like Sam Houston State, there's only so much you can draw from that game,
Yeah.
just because they're so overmatched in that aspect. So, to me, there's a chance Sam Houston State's offense could be a little bit higher than what I have rated because they were bad last year. But I just don't see it offensively for Hawaii, even though they do have the returning quarterback who I know did receive offers in the transfer portal. I just think that the Sam Houston State defense is pretty legit. I think Hawaii's defense is better than people give them credit for, and I think that these teams probably both are. I wouldn't say that they're under teams necessarily, but maybe they're more under than people are kind of giving them credit for to this point.
All right. I think that's fair. I think that makes sense. Maybe I'm underrating Hawaii's, is ineptitude the right word, on offense? And you are noting that maybe Sam Houston needs a bit more of an upgrade on offense. So maybe, one of us might be not correct in our assessment of one of the opposing offenses.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly the case. Yeah. Potentially, UCLA, again, could be better defensively than they are on offense this season. So maybe there was one game that was played in a lot of wind, which people
Yeah.
know will have the biggest impact on offenses, where Hawaii was trying to be pretty vanilla. And then the other one, they were facing Big Ten offense or Big Ten defense. Hawaii or UCLA might not be great this year, but they're still a Big Ten defense with, Big Ten quality defenders
Yeah.
on that end. So maybe I've kind of downgraded their offense too much from what I had going into the year. But I don't know if we have much evidence that Hawaii's offense. We think of it as kind of a run and shoot offense, and they do throw it a lot. But I don't know if they've been that effective over the past few years. So I think that their offense is kind of seen a little bit better than it actually is.
Yeah, I think that's totally a fair point. The next game, let me be honest, I bet on a bunch of garbage teams this week, so we'll see how that goes. That's just where the bets have led me. I'd probably bet on like 6 teams that I think are truly awful. This one I think might be like one of the better ones of the crappy teams, though. I bet Nevada. I didn't even get a great number. I bet 17. It's at 17.5. I bet Nevada. I think this team is potentially good. They're well coached. Jeff Choda's come in there and made some really good adjustments. And then the offensive coordinator, who is escaping me, he comes from the Kansas tree with like Kotoneki's types and stuff. And you could see the offense is coming together nicely. The team had a greater than 90% win expectancy against Georgia Southern. They beat Troy outright on the road, and they probably should have beat SMU at home also as a massive underdog. So maybe the market just continues to not get this team correct. And I know it's now their 4th game where everyone's playing their 3rd game, and it's another travel week for them, and they're playing Minnesota. But Minnesota, I'm not certain this offense is fixed. I know Darius Taylor's back. He ran 14 times, 64 yards, a few catches against Rhode Island, how they destroyed them. Both teams outside the top 100 in seconds per play. Minnesota has conference play on deck. I believe it's either Iowa or Nebraska. So are they going to try and run this one up? It's a low total in the low 40s. So if you need Minnesota to really do the heavy lifting to do much of the scoring, just don't know if I'm there. I think this Nevada team continues to outperform expectations. I think they could definitely keep this within 2 scores and a field goal. So I like this Nevada team quite a bit for what it's worth. The team, it's Georgia Southern, and it's in Reno, but Georgia Southern have 5th percentile EPA per rush. I know, big jump in class, but this Nevada team, I think, is much better than the market has been all season now. So I'm going to keep riding this team through.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have some Nevada plus 17. To be honest with you, I thought that it would flash for a moment and go back down. The fact that it's gotten kind of thrown back in my face makes me wonder what I'm missing on this end. Um, Nevada's been really good all season. Minnesota wasn't good against North Carolina. I think that offensively, North Carolina isn't that good. So people are thinking that this Minnesota defense, with a fantastic performance. I just don't know if they did have that great of a performance or if they ran into a North Carolina offense that just isn't as good now that May's gone.
Uh-huh.
So I think that helps you. The slow pace is another thing that I think really can be in Nevada's kind of benefit to covering 17-point spread. Is both these teams play really, really slow. Nevada has taken their time, like you said. That guy from Kansas loves to do his shifts, motions, things like that, which take up some time. Minnesota is going to run the ball, obviously, and they still have not shown an ability to throw the ball. In the past 5 years with any kind of consistency. I know a lot of teams liked Brossmer and they wanted him in. So the fact that he's gotten to Minnesota and in the first game looks completely like he's been completely hamstrung by the coaching staff doesn't speak well, in my opinion. And they also lost their defensive coordinator. Rossi leaves to Michigan State. That's a little bit weird to me. Why is he leaving kind of to go to maybe Michigan State is a slight upgrade, but what I would consider somewhat lateral move
Yeah.
makes me wonder if there's something going on either in the coaching staff, if Minnesota's just not paying at the level that they need to in order to win at a high level. I just there's a lot of things going on in Minnesota I don't like. Nevada, there's a lot of things I do like with a new coach coming in. The slow pace makes all this kind of came to me liking Nevada a lot. Why this number is still at 17 and a half. My only thought process is, all this stuff is important, but at some level, there is a threshold that you just have to get to as far as athletes where you get outmanned. So maybe that's why this line is still there. If Nevada covers and we look right, it will be because all the signs were there the entire time. If they lose by a ton, I think it's just they didn't have the athletes and to kind of compete with Minnesota at that level because there is a threshold that you need to meet, and maybe they just don't meet it yet.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I just think there's always a handful of teams that, and this is completely anecdotal, but there are teams that the market just can't get right. And this, again, just the first one that comes to my head from last year is Arizona. The market couldn't get them right no matter what. It didn't, they were covering spreads by 2 touchdowns. They were just murdering. And I'm not even saying Nevada's doing it that well. It's just, this team was rated like shit. They've been like shit. The coaching upgrade is so impactful and the roster still isn't even there yet, but the coaching impact, they have a real coach in there from what was it? What was the coach's name? Ken Wilson. That's the name of my head. But he was so bad, and this upgrade to Jeff Choate clearly is impacting the team in a positive way. So I'll continue to ride that. They should be 2-1 right now. Could even argue they should be 3-0 right now.
Yeah, I think you're certainly right. Everybody's rating systems, including my own, is to what it's back tested on is what I'm improving teams by
Yeah.
is by kind of what is the best overall. How much do you improve each team each time? Certain teams are just going to be outliers in that regard, and picking them obviously is harder, but there might be something too. Picking them in real time, it's easier to do than it is kind of looking back at it. So there's a chance, yeah, that this coaching improvement is something that is such an outlier that models aren't necessarily taking to approach, and they're a little bit slower in regards to that. The counterpoint is there's been also a million teams that everybody overreacts to and thinks that now that they're great, and it's easy to kind of look back and be like, oh, they didn't get it right. I can't believe they didn't get it right that one team. But you're right. There is a chance that just everything is built on the average of these teams improving, or I shouldn't say everything. A lot of things are built on, okay, the average team, this is how much we weight it. Nevada might not fit into that bucket just based on the difference in coach and kind of what was happening at the end of last season as far as effort and things like that.
Yeah, totally. So before we move to the Underdog round robin, let me tell you about the sponsor today, and that's Rithmm. Rithmm is an AI-generated sports modeling app that lets you get in on the sports modeling action. We've been talking about models during this episode, and you don't know how to make one? Well, the best place to go is Rithmm. Rithmm gives you hundreds of different inputs and weights to let you build your sports betting model that could win instantly. Mine that I made with Rithmm, my pressure and run model, went 10-2 on over-unders in week 2. Really excited to run that again this week. Got plenty in there. Make sure you sign up for Rithmm using the link in the podcast description below to get started today. Make sure you sign up with Rithmm today to win this college football season. Okay, so Underdog round robin. Peanut. I like to do this, especially early in the year where I think variance is at its best. I think it's a lotto ticket for sure. We're not saying this has to win or anything. So in week 1, we went 3 of 5. That made us some money. It paid for the next one. Last week, we went 2 of 5. 2 of the losses being Arkansas at Oklahoma State and Tulane at Kansas State. So that really hurt. That would have been nice to at least get one of those home. At one point, I thought I was getting both home. So back on it again this week. I have a few written down. We don't need to break down every game. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to rattle off a few. You can hit some back if you have any, you think live underdogs in mind, and maybe we'll kind of shoot the shit around and see what sticks. I like to get around 5. 5's usually the sweet spot, I think, to where, you have a shot at making some decent money without, I guess, risking too much to get all the parlays in. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. I got some circled up here.
Okay, so I'm going from shortest money line to longest. I think this should be in order. But so 2 very small favorites, home dogs that I think have a good shot at winning are ECU against App State and Virginia against Maryland. Without breaking down the side in total, any thoughts on those 2 games? One stick out more than the other? You hate both? You love both? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think ECU might be just better than everybody has them right
Hell
now.
yeah, they are. Hell yeah, they are.
They've gotten a decent upgrade in the market already. Maybe that's not big enough. They've looked better offensively. They're running. They got a guy from Ole Miss coming in. They're running tempo. They're looking pretty. They're looking certainly more explosive than they were last season. And that defense, I think was pretty good last season actually. So I kind of like them on that side. And what was the other one again? Can you remind me?
Virginia against Maryland.
Yeah, that's one where I think Maryland's actually a decent team, probably the better side. If I was taking the spread, I probably would take Maryland at this point in time. But I do like being on the other side of variance there, just because I do have some questions about the Maryland quarterback and kind of what they are this season. They lost a tough one to Michigan State game. They probably should have won. So, no super strong opinions on that one. But I do think that there's some chance kind of with the variance. I'd rather be on the underdog in that game because I don't have a great feel.
Yeah. Any other, in this range of small, let's call it plus 120 to plus 150, any other ones stick out to you?
Yeah, I like, speaking of trash games, I like UMass over Buffalo.
Okay.
I think Buffalo's probably the worst offense in the NCAA. Their quarterback left to go to Eastern Michigan. If you're leaving to go to Eastern Michigan, what does that say about the state of the Buffalo program, where Eastern Michigan's upgrade? UMass, if you look at their first 2 games so far this season, they certainly played better against Toledo. They were the better team in that one, in my opinion. They should have won that game. I think in Eastern Michigan that the stats were a little misleading. That I think UMass has allowed a lot of sacks, which has hurt them so far this season. But I just think that offensively, Buffalo is the worst team in the country. I think that UMass has played a little bit better than their kind of raw numbers indicate so far this season. So I like that one, especially in a low total game where it's a low total, not a ton known about either one of these teams. So certainly a lot of variance in that one. I'd rather be on the plus side of the variance. And I think UMass is as good as Buffalo, to be frank.
Yeah, I'm not sure where's that number coming from, right? I guess Buffalo's at home. UMass, think about it this way even. I mean, what kind of gap do you have between Eastern Michigan and Buffalo? UMass closed as, I want to say it was a 2-point home favorite against Eastern Michigan, small-ish favorite. you're flipping it now and you're downgrading UMass quite a bit. I know they lost to Eastern Michigan, and rightfully so, but it seems like you're really crediting Buffalo with beating, what was it, Lafayette, and getting blanked by Missouri. You know what I mean? Like it's not really passing the smell test for me.
Yeah, I mean, Buffalo also in that game against Missouri, they put on running clocks in the second half of the game. Buffalo was running stuff just to get out of there. I mean, it
Yeah,
was such such a beating in that regard. So it's possible that those numbers are even worse. It should be worse than what they were. It was more of a mercy game than
yeah,
anything. So yeah, I like UMass in that one. Especially I think the UMass QB he's not good, but he probably is better than anything Buffalo has.
agreed. All right, I had UMass on the list. Another one on the list, Rice. I'm not this one. I'm not as I took Rice with the points outright. I'm not sure. Houston should have beat Oklahoma just flat out. Absolutely should have won that game. Their offense is pretty inept. Rice, their only game against FBS competition was Sam Houston. They got smoked in that game. It was 34-14. Again, I was noting Sam Houston's explosive plays. Rice went down, I believe, 17-0 in the first quarter. They had a pick six and an 80-yard touchdown go against them. So the game got away from them pretty quickly. This was a Rice team that was a darling going into the season. I've spoken with, I had people on this podcast say Rice is honestly in that second tier. Like they should be rated with the, call it USFs of the conference going into the year. They have a good quarterback in EJ Warner. Houston, I don't really know if they should be favored against anybody. I think this game's like a true coin flip. So if that's the case, I'm happy to take Rice at in the neighborhood of plus 160. I got to find it, but something like that. Plus 150 I have on FanDuel right now. Something like that. What do you think about that, Peanut?
Yeah, I mean, my one worry is I think Houston was pretty good along the lines of scrimmage against
Okay.
Oklahoma, which was pretty surprising to me. I didn't think Oklahoma's offensive line was good, but the way that they kind of won the battle in the trenches, still against what is supposedly a pretty good team, was surprising to me. But with that being said, yeah, maybe everybody's jumping off Rice a little bit too quick. Part of that might have to do with kind of the name brand that they have. And
Mhm.
all right, we were kind of, once you get one data point of them being bad, it's easier to downgrade them. But like you said, with Sam Houston State, the turnover early in that game kind of had a huge impact, and then you're playing down the entire time. I was a big fan of EJ Warner. I was a pretty decent fan of JT Daniels for the level that he was at for Rice, but he only played half the season for Rice last year. So I do think they have a quarterback upgrade from last year. I agree with you in the sense that I don't know what Houston, I think it could be a total mess there this year. And Rice might not be good, but they're more competently run. And I think that they're less of a, you know, dumpster fire is too strong of a word. It's Willie Fritz's first year.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's some real downside potential with Houston, where I think Rice is a little bit steadier at this point in time. So if Houston comes out and plays their A game, Rice isn't going to win.
Yeah.
They have better players on both sides of the ball. But my chances of Houston playing their A game are pretty low at this point. So I think it's worth a flyer in that regard.
Okay. This one's real gross. Are we sure Western Kentucky should be laying a touchdown at Middle Tennessee?
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
I,
Okay.
I think Middle Tennessee's really bad. I think that they really struggle. I had some rooting interest in the Middle Tennessee Ole Miss game, and I understand Western Kentucky is certainly not Ole Miss in terms of athletes. But there was guys running open that it wasn't an athlete thing; it was a scheme thing. And Western Kentucky, to me, is going to be doing some pretty similar things. Maybe I talked about how Texas State wanted to get rid of Finley, and maybe get rid of is too strong, but they weren't sad to see him go. Maybe he's not talented enough to hit those throws. But he did win the quarterback competition in camp against a guy that I think was at least somewhat competent. So to me, that says that he can. They at least have some faith in him. I think Middle Tennessee is. They're gonna. I think it's gonna be a rough year for them, personally.
Okay.
So.
What about FIU against FAU in the battle of South Florida? FIU plus 168 I'm looking at. I think FAU's awful. I bet against them in both games this season. I know they were. I think they were pretty fortunate to cover against Michigan State. I took the 6 with FIU when that was available. I know they had some good turnover fortune, but they also honestly they put up a pretty valiant effort against Indiana. This was a team that was getting a lot of love heading into the season, FIU, about returning production and how McIntyre usually builds these programs up. And this is the year they're going to take a step forward. FAU looks like in total disarray. That offense can't move at all. They were absolutely cooked by Army. That game was over in the first 7 minutes. So, again, a big number with potentially the better team. Short travel, too. It's not like this is like a road game. It is a road game, but, they're taking a bus down there. It's probably inside of 45 minutes, inside of a half hour. So I think FIU could be super live in this game. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I don't think FAU has done anything to inspire confidence to this point
Low
in the
total
season.
also.
Right. We got a low total. Two teams we don't know much about. I think Keon Jenkins is actually pretty decent for Florida International. But again, obviously for the level that he's at and everything like that. So it in that sense, I think that this is the kind of spot where you want to take your money line shots as opposed to taking the spread when it's in this range where there's a lot of variance going into these teams. You haven't seen much from the favorite so far this season, and the underdog has potentially the best or at least the most dynamic player on that side of the ball. It wouldn't shock me if either one of these teams wins by 2 scores. So in that case, go ahead, take the dog.
Okay. Any other ones? I got 3 more way down the board, though. So any other ones stick out to you in like this middle Tennessee type area?
I know that maybe it's maybe we're hopping on the train late, but I like Tulane against Oklahoma.
They're on the list. They're on the list.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance that I thought when Ty Thompson lost a job to Mensa, a true freshman, I was like, oh, maybe Ty Thompson just actually isn't good. They got somebody in against him at Oregon. From what I've seen so far, there's a chance Mensa's just super talented.
He's
and
good.
That's why
No. He's good. He made some mistakes, but he's talented for sure.
Yeah, so I mean that wasn't priced into them coming into the season. So that's a situation kind of where I said I might be slow to react on saying Houston State. I'm already reacting to Lane because I like the rest of the team. I like kind of when they went against Kansas State. I didn't think that they were out athleted in that game. It looked like they belonged on the field in terms of it didn't look like a G5 team playing a Power 5 team. Oklahoma. That Temple game, they had a ton of turnovers that was able to help them dominate that game. But they really looked like crap other than that. And I think on the lines of scrimmage, they're in trouble. Reports for Jackson Arnold, I thought he showed some flashes. He's dynamic in a sense, but he doesn't look kind of buttoned up to the level that you need a college quarterback to be to kind of consistently trust him. So I think Tulane is probably better on the defensive line than Oklahoma is on the offensive line. Oklahoma's missing a ton of guys on the outside as far as injuries. Guys been banged up all year. They've shown me nothing. So yeah, I like Tulane in that one.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And if you want to, I guess like you said, maybe we're a week late on getting this one. There's a chance for a letdown. Tulane, big effort, Big 12 team coming to their place. It's tough. They are going on the road here, but this Oklahoma team does not look up to snuff whatsoever. And you also think about they're hosting Tennessee in their SEC opener next week. Are they really gonna button it up in a week and get, you know what I mean? Or is it really let's get ready for conference play? So I don't know. Maybe they come out and give a valiant effort after a really, really shitty one, but that's now 2 to start the season. So I don't think you could just assume that this team is raring to go, like you mentioned, with some injuries as well at wide receiver. So I agree with you 100%. Tulane was on the list. They're now in with ink. We lost it last week. We're getting them this week. Okay. I got 2 more. So my first one is North Texas at Texas Tech. We were talking about Texas Tech earlier. They're still banged up. Taj Brooks is still questionable. My only concern is North Texas has their own injuries on the offensive line, which is obviously very important here. But in a similar vein, when you kind of want to take the dog with a low total, there's a ton of variance in this game. Total is at 69.5. Very nice total there. North Texas plus 280. The offense looks much improved with Chandler Morris there. Clearly, this is a guy that was tabbed the starter over Max Duggan the year TCU went to the national championship game. So the pedigree is there. He drops a level. He's an Eric Morris, who actually is a Texas Tech grad. In their offense, really looks to be humming there. Just question on the offensive line, but the Texas Tech's beat up defense doesn't even matter. So I think North Texas is worth a shout at plus 280. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, we talked about Washington State might just be bad. Texas Tech might just be bad.
Yeah.
They've done very little. I think North Texas is legitimately good on offense and might be one of the 5 worst defenses in the country. But if you are good on one side of the ball, then you at least have that in your pocket going into this game. And then defensively, there's always turnover luck. I mean, you don't. It sounds dumb to rely on, but when you're talking about plus 300 favorites, if you get a couple turnovers, that's something that's shown. It's pretty kind of random game to game, particularly for defenses. Defenses have a lot less impact on turnovers than people actually think. It's much more of an offense-driven statistic. So I think that North Texas, your hope is, 1, Texas Tech can't stop them, seems pretty likely, and 2, you get on the right end of some good positive variance. And as far as turnovers, maybe get a couple fumbles here. You get a little bit of red zone roulette on the defensive end where they're holding them to field goals. Let them go up and down the field, kind of play a shell defense, and then make your stand in the end zone or in the red zone there. Yeah, I could see it definitely, and as far as that goes.
Okay. I got one more, but I think it's easily the ugliest dog I could take. So do you have any other ones?
No, nothing really that's jumping off the page at me right now.
Okay. I talked about this on the Monday show. I've been against all the line movement. So market clearly not respecting my action, but also just not respecting that I have this thought here. Wyoming at home plus, where are we? Plus 365 against a BYU team that had a win total of 4.5. They beat an SMU team that clearly is much worse. And I won't say fortunate, but I think that game was a coin flip. They get that one. They go on the road to Laramie without their top 2 running backs, LJ Martin and I can't say his name for the life of me, Rapati or something. Top 2 running backs down. Might be a windy night in Laramie. We'll see. But Wyoming, they have lost to Arizona State by about 55, and they lost to FCS Idaho. Any thought here, Peanut, on if Wyoming could pull the upset here? Big number.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I will say, Wyoming is a little bit different at home. I don't know the altitude of BYU's campus, but I think playing at altitude helps him a little bit more than people kind of realize. Like you said, it can get windy in there. The game, it's windy and the game gets sloppy. That's obviously to Wyoming's benefit. That's to the underdog's benefit. The more randomness you can include in the game. Where I do worry is BYU is pretty dominant along the lines of scrimmage against SMU. I don't think that SMU is great along the offensive line, but they're better than Wyoming. It will be tough. It's tough, when you just get dominated on that side of the ball, or on the trenches. That's not something that is very prone to variance. Either you're bigger, faster, stronger, or you're not. And that's pretty consistent game to game. So I do worry on that end. I don't like what I've seen out of Wyoming so far.
How could you? How could you? They suck.
Right. So, I think it's going to be tough for them when they can't win the lines of scrimmage like that. And BYU's got those, 25-year-old kids that don't drink. So I think that they're more likely to have a more stable impact game to game.
Okay. So what I have down for us now, by the way, total in the Wyoming game, 39.5. So you want some variance there. I mean, Jesus. Okay. So I have 5 down for us, and we could tinker with it, but this is what I have based on from your words, trying to sense your vibes, and then also my thoughts. I have ECU, UMass, FIU, North Texas, and Tulane.
Yeah, I
I
like it.
don't see which one loses. I think that's five for five right there.
Yeah, exactly.
I struggle to see a loss there. Which one loses? You tell me. They should all be favored.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Tulane, 14-point dog, market's off.
Yeah, no, big wrong team favored. No, that's great. So we'll count there again. ECU, UMass, FIU, Tulane, and North Texas. That'll be this week's round robin. And then adding a bet, I bet Nevada plus 17. It has Mr. _ Peanut Better's stamp of approval as well. Peanut, I appreciate you taking the time. We went a little over an hour. You were great. I really appreciate it. I'll have to have you on again sometime. Any other games that we didn't hit on that you want to give a note about? Anything that sticks out to you? Anything, please share.
No, I mean, I'm just kind of excited, for conference games to start here. I joked off the top that it wasn't exactly a great opening slate here. I think that once we start to get into kind of the nitty gritty of the season, it's going to be really exciting here. So looking forward to that, just in a little bit. So should be good.
All right, great, man. Well, I appreciate it. Again, for me, round robin, I just shared Nevada plus 17. If you want all the other plays from the early week show, it's in the Google sheet in the description below. You could track every bet in real time on my bet stamp at RW33. Peanut, I appreciate you taking the time to come on. It was a great episode. And until next week, enjoy the games, enjoy week 3, and hope everybody's bets cash.
Absolutely. Have a good one.